So welcome to Earthwalk Ways. This is a podcast covering ancient wisdom and modern understanding about life as a soul having an earthly experience on a living planet filled with purpose and meaning. And so on this podcast, we have explored this medicine wheel before. I want to share a bit more about a sweat lodge, a ceremony that honors and works with this medicine wheel and this medicine that is held within this medicine wheel, which is the journey of life. So there's an importance of endings and release in this journey in order for the new beginnings to bear fruit. And so here we are in this kind of now open, flourishing time, beginning of May, coming in here, and there's this beautiful sort of celebration of the wedding between the earth and the sky is how I always experience it. The sun, and as it rises in the sky, all of the beautiful green gowns and, ceremony just breaks out, right? All of nature just celebrates this time in such a beautiful way. So, this is sort of this time which is halfway between equinox and solstice that is, really moving into sort of the beginning of summer in some ways. And so May, throughout many traditions, is the month of this bride, of this wedding feast, of this, ceremony of the wedding between the sun and the earth. And May is also a contraction of the name Mary. And so this is in a way, the feminine face of the divine that's all around us as spring moves into the fullness of summer. And I really enjoy this time of year. It's one of my favorites. But so we've scheduled this weekend, we're going to be honoring this time, Mother Earth, the bride of the sun, in a beautiful nature-based ceremony, traditionally called a sweat lodge. And, it's traditionally called other names besides a sweat lodge, but in the West, that's kind of how it's come to be known. It's not my favorite way of referring to it. So to me, it is a healing lodge, a medicine lodge, and this lodge is a purification and cleansing rite and works with this renewal of life through the medicine wheel. And it works on the process of endings and letting go in a way, so that we can be reborn. And we go sort of back into the womb of the earth that's created symbolically, ritually, in order to, do this releasing, this cleansing, this, reconnecting with our deeper self, our truer nature, our hearts are, through a kind of releasing and letting go of the shadows within us. So it's a cleansing on, all levels. So in the way that it is done, we're also cleansing on the physical level, and we're cleansing on the spiritual level, and then we're cleansing on an emotional and mental level as well. So the sacred space of the lodge is created by bending branches and weaving them into a dome-shaped space with a center in the ground dug out. And then the dirt that was dug out is placed at the opening of the structure a few feet in front of it, and it becomes like the head of the turtle. So you have this altar in the front that is, and then a space, and then the door, and then this dome-shaped structure. And so it's sort of understood as a reference to North America as Turtle Island, right? The terra firma that we inhabit, our home, and I think it's cosmologically, all of Earth, the land, right? Is the turtle who is, surrounded by the seas, the ocean, the waters, and is what supports us, and it's where we, are nourished and taken care of. So our turtle mother in that way. So the way that it's shaped also with the opening inside and this enclosed dark space, and it's has the warmth and the moisture from the water that's placed on the heated stones, and so you have this beautiful alchemy that is like womb-like to me. And so, my lodges are probably not at all, I mean, they're informed by the medicine wheel, but I think that they're a kind of feminine version, and an earth-based version, and a kind of way of really learning how to melt and to surrender and to, feel supported in our journey around the medicine wheel of life. And so we do, like our time in the ceremony is like a period of time where we can be deeply within ourselves and, examine, our states, what we need, what's going on in our lives, in relationship to the journey around the medicine wheel. So anyway, the description of the space is also, this is like our home. This is the womb of the earth. And so this is where we go and we sit on the ground, and it's dark and, like I said, moist and warm inside. And it's a place where we can deeply, deeply melt, go into, into our bodies and into our spirit and into all of our feelings. So I love the space of the mother holding us. So, and there's a door in the structure which is aligned, with a large bonfire, which is in this lodge in the east. And it's this where the stones are heated. And of course the fire, is being created by burning wood, but the wood is here because of the light of the sun. It's the photosynthesis of the plants that, and the trees that create this wood that we burn. And so again, representing the sun. And then there's also the source of heat in the molten center of the earth that is a part of this, deep connection, of the fire element, right? And so, as we are connecting with, this, and then the air, also is, part of this. So we have earth, air, fire, and then there's water. And so we use the water and we pour it on the stones, and it makes steam, which carries our prayers and also helps with our cleansing. And so, it's a very interesting, just physical ceremony that speaks very deeply to, the essential nature of its own thing without, anything else but just doing it. And so, in some ways, probably just experiencing that as many times as possible will help you understand the true power of such a ceremony. And it's universal. It's many, many, many cultures, have one form or another of this kind of ceremony. So part of what I like about it is that, we have lost our sense of belonging to the earth, and especially, like our Anglo culture, our westernized civilization, and we live in a separated state that has lost the realization of our interdependence and the sense of the whole fabric of life, the ecology, and really, in a way, the hospitality of this planet, right? We've forgotten our relationships, and that's with each other now as humans, even, but for many a long time, we've lost our relationship with other forms of life, with the elements, with the weather patterns. It's like there's a way that, in the earlier times, the whole world was alive and was, moved by spirit and by its own inner wisdom and intention. And then we lost that connection and that understanding. And, when we see nature through the mind, we just see the objects. We see the tree as a board feet of lumber. We see, the mountain as something to be mined or conquered. It's utilitarian. So these are the things we have to see through our heart, these deeper meanings and these deeper spiritual understandings of life. The mind is not going to find them, and we can do experiments or search with that instrument, and it won't ever show us, whether what's there. But our heart knows. Our heart has a different level of experiencing. So in one way, it's an electromagnetic sensory organ, and it's the largest electromagnetic generator in our body, and it exchanges energies with everything. And I think more and more we're understanding that there's information, there's frequency, there's another form of understanding what's happening. And then there's this open, vast interdependency and interconnectedness that we have with everything. And so I think if we experience that more directly and we remember the truth of that is even supported scientifically, like we would have a different experience of how the world is supporting us and loving us, and that we're not really here alone, or it's not really the enemy, or nature's not just something to sell for profit. So we're learning these things, I think, now in this time, which I think is a time of ending and a larger scale of things, even though we're in the year of a new beginning, I think in a collective larger time scale, we're still in an ending process of an old mode of understanding and being. And so the sweat, I think, is a beautiful way of just calling us back to remember and reconnect ourselves to spirit, to all of nature, and to reconnect ourselves to our hearts so we can know this directly through our own experience and not have to rely on experts or anyone to tell us, but to know what we know within. And to do that, we also have to purify and clear our history and our presumptions, because a lot of times, we had experiences and we drew conclusions, and, that was maybe appropriate for that moment, but then we projected onto the future. And that also is a part of the purification that we need to do so that we can meet each moment, sort of with beginner's mind, and newness and not knowing, but, being, very fully present in the heart will allow us, instead of to defend ourselves or something, we can respond. And so, we're learning a new way, I think, ultimately, and how to be with and on the earth. And so, being a part of this whole earth, we are also connected to the unseen world of spirit, right? There's elementals and nature spirits and the ancestors and our plant cesters and guides and saints and healers, and many, many cultures, know of these, and people experience them often in medicine journeys and that sort of thing. So maybe we can, again, not know exactly, what these are or where they come from, but for the most part, they seem to have wisdom. They seem to guide us. They seem to, offer expanded perspectives and maybe there's also malevolent things out there as well, so we're kind of, I think, beginning to open our eyes to a more multidimensional world, out of our kind of materialistic three-dimensional understanding of things. And so as we do that, we may be experiencing more of things energetically and, emotionally and spiritually. So, it's like when we can connect with our spiritual resource and we can receive that also through nature, then we begin also to repair this, separation that we're in. And in some ways we are isolating from the most fundamental connection that we need, both individually and collectively, to thrive and live a life of meaning. So, it's kind of this larger context of purpose here, other than being a consumer. What are we doing here? And there's a million beautiful answers. They're all, I think, I think there's a lot of diversity, and I think it can be any and all of them in many ways. I think there are big themes in it all, and they are cross-cultural. And so I love to also look at those kinds of things. And I think, again, the medicine wheel and the sweat lodge are cross-cultural kinds of things. So spirit is embodied in all the earth, the trees and streams and flows of breezes through the leaves, the licking of the tongues of fire, the rocks and the waterfalls. Clouds and creatures all have spirits that dwell within them. In our state of gross materialism, we thought this kind of perception was just superstition, projection, and in our scientific exploration into the nature of matter, we have never been able to directly observe with physical instruments, within a degree of certainty, any subtle matter connected with these aspects of nature. So to the mind, again, the tree is, is just a source of paper, and may, even scientifically, we're now seeing, that it's sentient, but, does that mean it has a sense of self, it's conscious in the way that we understand consciousness? So we still have this problem that, we feel isolated as human beings, is the only thing that's conscious. But when I go into my heart and I connect and get really present with nature, it's not my direct experience. And so, and I find that nature seems to be, like responsive and dancing. We were singing outside in the forest, and it was just kind of amazing because when we were singing together and, had a guitarist and a drum, and all of a sudden, all the birds were singing with us. And it was like amazing, that there was just this cacophony of birdsong around. And it was like really on time, it was like almost like they were listening in some way and coming in certain moments. And then, we closed down the singing for a little while and went into a meditation. And so we were silent. And, it took a little while, but gradually, I never felt the forest so still. Everything was just in that space of stillness and silence. And then we completed that and started singing a few songs again, and then the birds joined up. It was, there's something, more happening than our Western mind understands. And I think indigenous peoples and, people that live closer to nature, they recognize this, it's like it's so experiential and such a direct reality that, they don't second guess, their own experience in the same way that I think some of the studying something from a distance, in a scientific methodology has us do. And it's okay to question, but I think we need to have both and or something, it's like we can learn, and they seem to be coming closer together. So I like that. But, there's a thing that, I think we lost, is we lost this mythic consciousness. And I think it's like, it doesn't have to be superstitious. It doesn't have to, It doesn't have to mean that we, think that, these spirits or these gods or these, forces, these mythic stories are ultimate reality. I think they're that allegory. They're stories pointing to a deeper reality that you can't really capture, but you can kind of be a finger pointing at the moon, like how can we describe the moon? You can't really name the moon. You have to be in the moment, experiencing the light of the moon and noticing, how it touches you. So there's all of this, way that we're trying to sort of rebirth, I think, in our world now, both this ancient but new form of connected consciousness. And to have this underlying connection with Mother Earth, and this sense of having a mother even, that's, really present in all of nature, an underlying nurturing, some place where we belong. And I know many people don't feel this directly, but I think it's again just because energetically we've been disconnected. And so as we, kind of ground back into our bodies and into our beings and into the earth, I think we will actually feel the support that's there personally and individually. And we'll begin to understand, that even though life, is the medicine wheel and it's life and death and, loss and, grief, that all of that is a part of the whole. And, it's ultimately good and joy and love that prevails. So, we can sense the underlying loss in the field of time, where life and death are present, and it's sort of where our quandary, lives. Our mother is both light and dark, and this life and death, pleasure and pain in this material world, in this physical world. And again, this is the medicine wheel of life, encompassing the 7 directions. Our mother, is at the center, is both the depths and the heights and the circumference of it all. And so there's this wholeness, and it is this wholeness that brings healing. And in this, wholeness of the medicine wheel, it also implies and contains the journey of time. And that journey always has 4 movements that make up the beginning, middle, and end. So it's like the 4 seasons, the 4 elements, the 4 times of day. There are 4 seasons of life. So, there's beginnings, there's growth, there's harvest, and endings. And this is the basic movement of time. And so it's basically non-dual, right? There's summer and winter. It's not summer versus winter. It's not, life versus death. It's like somehow the goodness of life encompasses the loss, the death, and the truth is that, there's, the medicine wheel is not just ending with our life, but we have many deaths. There's, endings, of all kinds of things in life in this field of time. And so, we're cycling through the cycle of the endings, all through our lives. And it's a question of, do we know what to do with those? And I think that's a part of our difficulty in our culture is we've lost the wisdom to know, the culture has lost the wisdom to know, how to allow these essential initiations, these movements, from life into death and then into rebirth, right, to happen. And so we get stuck resisting death, and then we get stuck kind of either in death or, in a life that's like death. It doesn't work. And so then we have addiction, we have, unhappiness, dissatisfaction. What's life about? It just seems to be distract ourselves to try to find pleasure. So, that this is sort of like the loss of the sacred round, in this mandala of life. And life has seasons, and we are always beginning and ending in cycles within cycles. And the mind wants to just acknowledge the upward movement of the wheel, the birth and the growth, and the good harvest. But the reaping of our measure is always followed by ending and loss. And we have trouble with this dark aspect of the cycle. Understandably, right? We're human, and we don't understand, and we don't know. And yet every healthy human culture has developed very specific ways to meet this reality. Our culture mostly tries to deny it. Our journey is not really allowed to be completing in the medicine wheel. And we often don't know what to do, and so we get stuck in the dark half because we have not the wisdom, to teach us how to face and move through it. And so it's part of what, we're, I think, getting initiated into, like, we're going to be going into and through it, and hopefully finding our way. But it's kind of like what's happening now means that we can no longer avoid the death, the loss, the endings. And that, I think, is a part of an initiatory journey for, humanity in some way. So part of our isolation and separation is because we are in grief, right? We're not good company, we don't believe. We don't know how to be with each other in grief. We don't feel like people would want to be with us because we're not feeling, exciting or positive or something. And so we're uncomfortable because, when others are grieving too, it brings us close to our own. We don't know what to do. We want to, help them get out of the sorrow. We want to get ourselves out of being with them in their sorrow, so we get all discombobulated, and again, grief feels like it's taboo. It's not acceptable. It's not appropriate. And we have to go hide. And I think that's why there's so much isolation in our world, maybe right now, is that people prefer to be by themselves. It's easier in some ways, and also I think people are just feeling the need to grieve or to, feel stuck in their losses or, kind of just where they are. And to be around other people seems like, you have to accommodate. And I think the thing that, we do need is to still, hold our own spaces now for this grieving process, and to maybe even find ways to help our culture learn how to hold a better space for this process. So, when we're in grief, we're just hearing this pressure, buck up, don't worry, keep going, and in some ways it's true, to get through a big loss, we don't want to collapse into it. But there's this kind of middle way of moving through the experience by learning how to be with ourselves and with others in these various states of grief. And we don't, right now it's stigmatized, and then we get trapped in it. So if we look at our material wealth and we tell ourselves, we have no reason to grieve, or we should just be grateful, and that's true, we should. But can we be grateful and grieve at the same time? We live in a field of time, and loss is a part of that experience in each moment. And our culture very much tries to deny that. We kind of naturally, just as creatures, try to skip over it because it doesn't feel good. It seems painful in and of itself, and then we interpret it. It must mean something is wrong about us. We see how materially blessed maybe we are, and we fight within ourselves over our frustrations and our negative attitudes. We see so many others on earth with more burdens than our own. So, we end up with what is wrong with me, and, I should be happy. I should be happy, which is a denial of where we are, what we feel. And so, we hear ourselves say these things, and we spend endless hours then trying to find out what's the source of our unhappiness. It's life. It's the field of time. It is change and loss and death. It's missed opportunity. It's, we're going to get into in a minute, sort of the 5 gates of grief, right? And maybe there's 6 even, so there's, probably even more. But it's like there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's something to learn to dance with. We have to learn to take our place on the medicine wheel of experience and embrace the lessons of grief and loss. So here we are in the spring of the year, but this year feels old. This year feels like it's a cycle of renewal, sort of shining feebly through the ragged and torn vestiges of our earth and her peoples uprooted, displaced, her forests being more and more depleted and droughty, her atmosphere more and more polluted by a consciousness that doesn't seem to want to lose or die, feels ashamed of this and any sorrow or loss that creates vulnerability. And yet it is that vulnerability that makes us all one, makes us human and creatures, brothers and sisters, with all life on this planet. And all are equal. And we all came here to die. It's the great equalizer. It's the great ultimate leveler. And we all came here to die many, many small deaths in preparation for the big death. In Western culture, we don't want to lose, we don't want to die, we don't want to, have disappointment, we don't want to have loss, we don't want to face anything like that. And that's why we're stuck, sort of on this medicine wheel, and it's in crisis. And when things are stuck and in crisis, the life force is going to break it through, but it's going to do it, through shaking and through, kind of demolition of the structures that are holding it back. So, we want to embrace all of this, and that allows us then in this season also to, celebrate the amazing beauty around us. In my heart, I want to sing and give praise, to the amazing resilience and the willingness of the natural processes to keep showing up every year in spite of the stress, doing their best, often getting set back a whole year after a late frost, or, like the crops can't grow without the nitrogen that they need. These things are, all parts of a larger, mirroring and reflection back to us, that we're not imbalanced, that we're trying to understand something at a much deeper level than we've been understanding before. And the amazing life force, we see in the spring. I mean, it is a miracle every year that just builds into this amazing cacophony of colors and increasing light, warmth. And I watched the new buds come out of the earth, after being hidden within, and then suddenly making this debut. And it's like to me, it's like one of my hymns says, it's the force of life that breaks through stone. It feels like this life force is this, Herculean, resilience and strength and power that, can break through all of these blocks of stone that even our own psyches have put in the way, right? And so, to celebrate this amazing power of life that renews and makes things be reborn, and to, understand that, that there's this amazing green fire, that, like, as the leaves start greening and leaving out, I notice it starts, a little bit on the ground here and there, and then slowly over time you see like the leaves coming out more and more until all of a sudden the tops of the canopies are fully, out, and it's almost like what I call a slow green fire, right? It's like it starts to glow on the ground and then gradually builds into this amazing space that we are here in May, of this, celebration of the Holy Bride, all decked in her lacy gown, that one of my hymns says, that her gown is lacy green and lofts with every breeze. The little birds take refuge there. Right? My lady fair, I hear them sing. I hear them sing, and in my heart I bless this brand new day. So there's this, feeling of this wedding feast that happens at this time of the year. And again, we can't fully rejoice in it until we have fully accepted and felt our losses and our grief. So, we want this ancient renewal of life, but somehow, in our culture, we have to back up a little ways. And so that's what we're going to do here in a minute. I like to offer a sweat lodge which works with this medicine wheel 4 times a year, because it's really a good practice, among other practices, to, clear out this old debris. And the practice of the lodge is a good way to release and clear our old energies. So are the session work, and the grief work that we can do, both in groups and individually. So, if any of this resonates with you, get in touch, because, there's ways that we're exploring, or we're seeking to support, how can we, hold a space. But definitely the cleansing allows the reset, right, and a connection with our true nature. So in the medicine wheel and in the sweat lodge, we have a beautiful ceremony that supports this. It can also be done, in vision quests and all of those kinds of things. So consider a retreat, consider, different ways to take your own deep dive into this process. So the first thing that, we need to do before rebirth is to die. And by that I mean to accept the past as it is. It's always less than how we wanted it to be. We have to feel and acknowledge all our feelings. We have to allow the wild edge of sorrow to take us to our depths. We need to grieve our loss. We don't need to get, sort of lost in our loss, or histrionic, or, too dramatic with it. There's a way that sometimes, there's a way that, we just forget that loss is a part of life. And then when it happens to us, it seems like somehow it's unfair, or it's not, something very tragic has happened, and, it's real and there is tragedy, but we can take it like a little bit, I can't remember the word, I'm trying to think of a word, but anyway, we overdo it. a little bit. So we're trying to find this balance of being with the truth of our loss, and the body is a really good, register of that. If we go into our mind and into our stories, like we can paint these scenarios that we just live and relive, and brings out anguish, or it just doesn't really seem to move it forward. It just recycles it. And so there's this other way of working with our grief that's more conscious and held. And so first of all, we have to just understand that this aspect of grief is really natural. It's much more of something that we're is part of just being in life. And if we can take it on and embrace it in a different way than our culture does, it helps a lot. So what we do oftentimes is really make it a lot more difficult. And in some senses, grief needs to just be cleared. It's like a wave of heaviness inside that if we can let it move, like a powerful ocean wave, it kind of sleeps us clean, and then we're out into a vaster ocean of our consciousness and life. It's like, but we end up getting sort of bogged down in parts of it, and then it gets our attention, and we stay sort of identified with it, and then we lose and miss out on the rest of life in its larger sense. So feel inside you, time and again, and notice where you're heavy and weighted down, or where you're tight and pushing yourself through life, or maybe you feel at war or feel empty and unfulfilled. Just notice those things. Whatever is with us is hurting or hating or shaming or blaming. All of that is part of unmet grief. And our inability to surrender because we see it as losing. So we must swallow the river Ganges. We must accept the north, the winter, before we can move into the spring again. And this is, why we have such difficulty in the West. So I really like a book by Francis Weller, who, introduced me to the 5 gates of grief. And I named this, it's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And I love that title, right? So it says, like in The Wild Edge of Sorrow, psychotherapist Francis Weller frames grief as a necessary lifelong apprenticeship rather than a problem. So that's really a different way of understanding grief when we look at how we sort of unconsciously deal with grief. And most of the time we're just being unconscious in the way that we deal with grief. So he argues that, we need to do that. We need the shared communal rituals, which are vital for transforming both personal and collective pain. And so this is also where, our culture has lost some needed support that, again, we need to be aware of and find ways of bringing back. And that's part of what we do here at Earthwalk Ways, is we try to create the spaces for these, ancient but necessarily future ways that we have to reinvent here in our time now. So Weller's core argument is that the heart is a settled chamber, and you cannot selectively numb the difficult emotions without also numbing the beautiful ones. If you close the door on sorrow, you inadvertently lock out joy. So Weller often uses the metaphor of a garden. He says, grief acts as a plow that breaks up the hard, crusty surface of the ego. The tillage makes the soil of the soul soft and porous. Without this softening, joy has nowhere to take root. A person who hasn't been broken open by life remains brittle. A person who has moved through the gates of sorrow develops a suppleness that allows them to be touched by beauty. And so he says also that it's a price of belonging. He suggests that joy is the overflow of feeling truly connected to the world. However, in order to be connected to the world is to be vulnerable to its pain. If you want to feel the exhilaration of a sunrise or the warmth of a community, you must also be willing to feel the sorrows of the world. That's one of the gates of sorrow. And to feel at all is to accept the full spectrum of the human contract. So we don't realize, that all of these things are kind of together, and by trying to, resolve our pain, our grief, we've separated ourselves in ways that, leave us lost and in almost eternal grief, perpetual, states, because we can't move past them. So he goes on to talk about how, we're trying to move from from thin to thick time. So he says, when we avoid grief, we live in thin time, a shallow, distracted state where we stay busy to avoid the underlying weight of our lives. Grieving forces us into thick time, where we are fully present. It is only in this state of presence that joy, which is usually found in small fleeting moments, can actually be registered by our senses. So, we have to kind of drop into this thick time. And it's part of why, we kind of want to stay on the surface. But we have to realize, it may seem like it's safer up there, or it may seem, but in a way it's empty. It doesn't fulfill the deeper need of our soul, of our nature, to truly take life on in this deep, vulnerable, meaningful way. So, and then he talks about joy as a shared social fabric. He says in many indigenous cultures, joy and grief are communal. By expressing sorrow together in ritual, the heavy energy is cleared away, making room for genuine celebration. Without the release of the dark water, the clear water of joy becomes stagnant and bitter. In short, grief is not the opposite of joy. It is the path to it. Without the capacity to mourn what we love, our love becomes a shallow attachment rather than a deep, soulful engagement with life. So that's the invitation. And so these are the 5 gates of sorrow. See if you can allow yourself to recall in yourself any of the sorrows that you've left at these gates. So the first gate is the most familiar gate. And it's this, truth that we spoke of earlier. Everything we love, we will lose. This recognizes the fierce truth of impermanence. This is the truth that Buddha used, in his awakening. And so love and loss are always inextricably linked. And, we often try to avoid the loss by not loving, so, I mean, that's a choice, maybe, sort of might work, but it costs, it has side effects. So we have to really, again, look at our just choices and see, if we want to choose again. And it's not easy, it takes a lot of courage to feel all of life fully. It is the warrior path in a lot of ways. So the second gate are the places that have not known love. So there's deep grief inside of us, often all the way back to the inner child. And then it recurs, it gets repeated, right? And this gate refers to the grief for the parts of ourselves also that we have judged, shamed, or banished ourselves. And we usually did that because, somebody else did as well. But, these neglected pieces of soul that have been excluded from our circle of worth, and that's been due to trauma or neglect. So that's a gate of sorrow. Can you tune into that? Can you remember in your own self, in your own being, connect with this gate of sorrow, someplace in you that didn't know the love that it wanted, that it longed for, that it was seeking, couldn't find it. So the third gate of sorrow, this is the sorrows of the world. This is the grief we feel for the suffering of the planet and the collective, such as climate change, the loss of habitats, or social injustice. It connects us to the anima mundi, or the soul of the world. I would say it is where we are, naturally just connected to that. And yet again, it's sometimes more hard to feel others' pain than our own, especially if we love them. So, these are very powerful experiences that life asks of us. So the fourth gate of sorrow are things that we expected and did not receive. Things, what we expected, anything, events, experiences. So this gate addresses also the longing to belong and the loss of things we were biologically and ancestrally designed to receive. There's a part of us that knows what we were meant to receive and didn't. Things like supportive community, the village, stable mentorship, the masculine, still doing its task of initiating the young men, right? And mentoring the young men into being fully into their inner kings, like this deep sense of purpose, right? So we know we were supposed to have inherited this deep inside of us, and we just can't understand, this is where, well, it must be something wrong with us, right? But it's not. It's just something wrong in the collective, right? It's like yeah, it's the sins of the father passed down, their father and their father's father, and the way that it's just, we've chosen a path that maybe was from a huge collective trauma, that was just too much PTSD for, our particular culture or certain, aspects to bear. And so, we decided we were going to conquer the world with our technology and have only good things. But it doesn't, like the journey is much deeper than that. And so it's a beautiful thing that we've created and we've risen and we've, even lifted, things up in that, but it's only half the wheel. So when we can embrace and come back into fullness with the whole wheel, then I think we'll have balance. And that's what the whole medicine wheel is about. And Sweat Lodge and the releasing, it's like about just restoring balance. We get out of balance, and that's okay. We're in a, sort of a place where we're responding to forces, and so we just have to keep rebalancing. It's an perfectly acceptable and appropriate task to always do. And to notice, when we're off balance, and to seek how to restore balance. And so one of the ways is to realize where we've refused grief. And so the fifth gate of grief is ancestral grief. And so we kind of were mentioning that. So this involves the unexpressed sorrows, traumas, and unrealized dreams of those who came before us. It is the weight we carry for our lineage, including the loss of ancestral languages, rituals, and homelands. And the loss of families, of like in our world, we've gone from extended families to nuclear families to partial nuclear families, right? And so there's this sort of loss of our connection through our lineage. And in some ways, we bring together the lineages on both sides of our, we inherit the genes from both sides. We also inherit the lineages. So we need to find a way to be with this, and it's not by, like trying to avoid it. I don't think it's like, I like this idea that, really it's something that, we have to recognize as something that's a lifelong process. It's like grief is a lifelong apprenticeship rather than a problem. And so, we kind of, as human beings, humbly have to surrender ourselves to this apprenticeship, to learn from it, because that is the medicine wheel of life and death and incarnation as on this planet. So Weller also mentions this optional sixth gate trauma, which is, again, I think connected to the ancestral stuff and also, other things. So, but it deals with just the overwhelming shock and brutality that can shatter one's sense of safety. So, and that, is a shattering and a shock, but underneath that is grief. And so there's many levels, and again, like all of our outrage, our anger, our denial, all of that is just aspects of grief, but we have to move towards embracing the sorrow. And the longer that we stay refusing to go all the way through the process, which has a natural cycle to it, but moves towards acceptance. So if we cannot accept and move through these winters of life, then we get stuck and numb, and then we can't receive the nourishment of life, which is also a soul nourishment that comes from us, to us from the depths of our experience. So I hope you can bring yourself to your grief and find a way to share your grief with nature and with your soul family, at least, right? We really need to renew, rebirth, restore, revision our very relationship with grief. And let it be the mother of sorrows that births us into our new resilience and grace. I want to invite people to come together We have some programs here. We have a deep listening Zoom circle where we can learn to be with and acknowledge our own and others' grief. Our next session is May 6th. You can send an email to contact me if you're interested in getting the link. I also do individual sessions and also work very, much in this realm of working with our grief, our unfelt grief. So, and then May 16th and 17th, we're going to do a weekend together. If people are interested in small group experience where, we go deep together, and hold a space for each other. So I hope you can find your own way into this time of rebirth and open actually to this not knowing, because that's where we bring the past back into the present. And I think right now things are transforming themselves and we don't really know. And we don't really want to bring the past into the present. Now, sometimes we will, so it's not like trying to block that, or deny that again, but it's kind of being aware of it and seeking to, trust something that we've not trusted before, trust the deeper, flows of nature, of something that's happening here on the planet that is bigger than all of us. And trust that our best way through is to just be in the experience of it and to feel fully all that it brings, because that's the food for the soul. And, to find our way into the grief of anything that's lost so that we can not carry, it may be that we grieve and we go forward a step and we have more grief to go, because there's a new loss coming, but if we stay current in our grieving, I think that will give us the resilience to, continue. And there's something about just, acknowledging our own pain and our grief that gives us life and helps us, have internal, somehow the connection with our internal yes, our inner willingness can come again, it's the rebirth, but we have to have the death and the grief. So, yes, work with this, we have to learn as we go. We're here learning what we didn't yet know, and we're going to make mistakes. It's okay, we're learning. So explore what is the right way, what is another way, what is a way to correct ourselves, to find our way forward, a new way forward. What are you doing? What's not working? But not in a deep analytical kind of figuring it out way, but in a deep feeling it out way. Connected with yourself, connected with, the depths of your being, that thick experience. All success is dependent on failure, and joy is dependent on grief. And the medicine wheel brings this teaching to us and invites us to embrace the whole of life and the whole of ourselves within it. Okay, I guess that is our completion for today. Thanks for joining us. I will see you in 2 weeks. Hope to see you here at Earthwalk Retreat. Take care.